I still remember that Tuesday night, the kind of night that hums with fluorescent light and quiet resentment. The office smelled like burnt coffee and wet carpet, and somewhere down the hall Brent was laughing too loudly again. He always laughed like someone trying to convince himself he belonged. He waved a can of energy drink at me like it was some trophy. "No need to stay late, Nancy," he said, flashing that easy smile people only get after being promoted for the wrong reasons. 27 years old, still thinking lead infrastructure engineer meant king of the world. I wanted to tell him I'd been holding that world together long before he knew how to spell containerization. But I didn't. I just smiled because the people who keep things running are never the ones who get to explain how. My title, Senior Systems Specialist, sounded impressive until you realized it was the label they invented back when I was duct taping servers together with patience, coffee, and Stack Overflow threads. Brent smelled like victory and body spray. I smelled like work. While he was upstairs talking to the board about his vision, he was using the diagrams I'd drawn. The same ones I'd uploaded months ago to a folder called ReadMe_morons, because sometimes sarcasm is the only oxygen you get. By 9:17 that night, the audit logs were screaming again. Vulnerabilities, outdated patches, a system hanging by a thread, and Brent was probably bragging over whiskey about how smooth the migration had gone. I patched it. I fixed the broken container, rerouted the cron jobs, cleaned up the mess. In the commit note, I typed, "All yours, sir." Subtle enough to sound polite, bitter enough to keep me sane. That's when it hit me. Not anger exactly, but the weight of every promotion that never came. In this place, advancement wasn't about skill. It was about who laughed at the right jokes, who wore the right polo on Friday, who toasted to innovation with the boss's bourbon. I wore thrift store sweaters and had opinions. That made me invisible. That night I didn't cry in the elevator, and I didn't order something expensive online to pretend I was fine. Instead, I did something that felt small but sharp. I started writing everything down. Not for revenge, not yet, just for the truth. Every email where Clay, the CTO, took credit for my work. Every Slack message where Brent asked what DNS even stood for. Every line of code I pushed that someone else claimed during demos. Screenshots, logs, timestamps. I called the folder arc. I wasn't sure what flood was coming, but I knew I planned to be the one still floating when it hit. When I looked back at my contract later that night, I saw something I'd never noticed before. Clause 14, Severance Protocol. Termination requires written notice and payment within 72 hours. Cute. Brent was already asking me how to access admin panels he barely understood. Clay hadn't written a line of code in years, but still called himself an architect. And me? I just kept quiet, smiling, documenting, waiting. Because underneath the exhaustion, something electric had started to hum inside me. Not fear, not rage, just clarity. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment the story really began. After that night, I started living two lives. By day, I was the quiet veteran, the one everyone forgot to invite a happy hour, the one they assumed would just handle it. By night, I became my own archivist. Every slight, every stolen idea, every half-truth that floated through the office, I stored it like evidence. My folder grew fast. Emails, chat logs, screenshots of project boards that quietly replaced my name with Brent's. Even the meeting notes Clay used in his pitch decks had my fingerprints on them. They thought they were being clever. But I was learning their patterns like bugs in the system I'd once built. At first, I told myself it wasn't revenge. It was self-preservation. But that's how it starts, doesn't it? You tell yourself you're just protecting your work, until one day, you realize you're preparing for war. I remember Clay's voice in a meeting one morning, smooth and hollow. "We're looking for a new direction," he said, as if direction had been lost somewhere between his ego and his inbox. He talked about agility, about young, dynamic minds. Everyone nodded. I just kept typing. The irony was, he hadn't written a single piece of functional code in 3 years. He once asked me if Linux was that Tesla thing. I didn't bother correcting him. Instead, I went home that night and opened the ARC folder again. Every file had a date. Every screenshot a story. There was something deeply satisfying about it, seeing their arrogance reduced to plain data. I began adding commentary beneath each piece of evidence, like footnotes to a private novel. Brent presents this next week, I'd write. Clay will claim it by Friday. And every time they proved me right, the bitterness hurt a little less, and the clarity grew sharper. The strange thing about documentation is that it makes you see patterns. Not just in code, but in people. The same loops, the same errors, the same lazy patches trying to cover the same underlying rot. I found my old contract again, buried in an ancient Yahoo inbox under coupon spam. There it was, Clause 14, that 72-hour rule. A line most people would skip, but I read it twice, then a third time like a puzzle. It was small, but it was structure, a line of code in the chaos. At work, things began to shift. Brent got louder. Clay started referring to his infrastructure plan during board meetings. HR suddenly had updates about restructuring. The storm was forming, and I could feel it, static in the air, the weight of something inevitable. I didn't panic. I just prepared. When Brent asked me to teach him the ropes, I smiled and did exactly that. Slowly, carefully. I showed him how the systems worked, step by step, pausing just long enough for him to miss something critical. He thought I was being thorough. I was building him a rope, long enough for him to hang himself with later. In the quiet hours after everyone left, I worked on something else. Not for them, for me. I started coding again, my own project, clean, precise, mine alone. A system that didn't need approval or permission. It was the first time in years I felt awake. They thought they were pushing me out, but all they were doing was giving me time to build my escape. I didn't realize it then, but I'd already lit the match. All Clay had to do was stumble in with the gas can. Clay called it a check-in. That was his favorite trick, make it sound casual so you walk in unarmed. He booked the glass conference room, the one that trapped heat like a greenhouse. Everyone could see inside, which was exactly the point. He smiled when I walked in, that politician smile people wear right before they twist the knife. You've done great work here, Nancy, he started, leaning back like we were equals sharing coffee. But the company's evolving. We're looking for fresh perspectives. There it was. The soft bullet of corporate language. Your old news. I sat there, staring at the condensation on my water glass, pretending I couldn't see the pity in his eyes. He talked about younger digital natives, about new energy. I wanted to laugh. This man, who still typed with 2 fingers, was telling me the company needed innovation. I nodded, smiled, and said, "Got it." What I really meant was, "You'll regret this." As I left the room, Brent walked by, winked at me through the glass, like this was all some inside joke. I didn't blink. The next morning, an email popped up on every screen except mine. Subject: Org chart refresh growth alignment. Everyone got it. I didn't. People avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when I entered a room. It was the quiet kind of execution, the kind where nobody says your name, but everyone already knows you're gone. They didn't fire me outright. That would have required courage. Instead, they started removing me piece by piece. My name vanished from project boards. My tickets got reassigned for faster onboarding. HR called it transition planning. I called it what it was, erasure. Brent now had access to systems he didn't understand. He'd sit in my chair, eating my sunflower seeds, watching tutorials about agile frameworks on YouTube like they were secret formulas. "Hey, could you show me again how the cron jobs sync with a third-party API?" he asked, crumbs on his shirt. "Of course," I said. I showed him everything, slowly, clearly, with just enough detail missing to guarantee chaos later. HR pretended to be busy. My manager, who used to ask me to fix his printer, now minimized spreadsheets when I entered his office. Once, I caught my own name on his screen before he scrambled to close it. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. The train was already moving and I was tied to the tracks. That night, I went home, poured a glass of cheap wine, and opened the ARC folder. The evidence stared back at me, every lie neatly timestamped, every stolen credit preserved. I pulled up my contract again, paragraph 9, subsection B. Termination must include full severance documentation and payment within 72 hours. We were past day 5. No paperwork. No severance. Just polite smiles and silence. They thought they were being clever, dragging it out, waiting for me to give up, to disappear quietly like the hundreds before me. But they didn't realize that being invisible isn't the same as being powerless. It just means no one's watching what you're building. I printed every email, every memo, every message that mentioned restructuring before my so-called check-in. My printer coughed out the pages like a slot machine paying in receipts. That's when I remembered an article I'd skimmed weeks ago, something about new labor laws, about severance delays triggering legal consequences. I didn't know all the details, but I knew one thing. This wasn't over. I smiled as the last page hit the tray. They thought I'd peaked. They thought they'd written my ending. But they'd just handed me my opening scene. The morning after my so-called exit meeting, the office was quieter than usual. People spoke in low tones, like guilt had a sound, and they didn't want to be caught making it. My access still worked, which almost made it worse. They hadn't officially fired me, just ghosted me in plain sight. I knew what they were doing, stretching time, softening the blow, hoping I'd just fade away. But I had the dates, the proof, and something better than panic: patience. By the end of that week, HR finally called. The woman on the line sounded like she'd practiced her apology in the mirror. "Nancy, I'm so sorry for the delay," she said. "We've just been slammed, clerical backlog and all that. Your severance paperwork should be ready any day now." Any day now. That was day 5. I told her I understood. And I did, just not in the way she thought. Because I knew what that delay meant. Somewhere in those missing hours, they were breaking their own contract. That night, I opened my laptop and searched for lawyers. Not the big glossy firms Clay played golf with, real ones. The kind you find through whispers, through forums, through people who've been burned before. That's how I found Raphael. His email signature was short: R. Alvarado, Employment Law. When he picked up the phone, his voice sounded like a mix of exhaustion and precision, the kind of tone that said he'd seen this movie before. "Send me everything," he said. "Contracts, emails, timestamps, especially anything with the words reorg or transition." I sent it all. An hour later, he called back. "I've got 2 kinds of news," he said. "Good and hilarious." "Start with hilarious. Your company broke the law." I blinked. "Which part?" He explained there was a new state statute, barely a few months old. Companies that failed to deliver severance documentation within 7 calendar days of termination lose the right to enforce non-compete clauses. I laughed, quietly disbelieving. "Wait, so because they dragged their feet, their own restrictions are invalid?" "Exactly," he said. "They wanted to keep you quiet, but all they did was cut their own leash." It was the first real victory I'd felt in months. Not the loud kind, just a deep, private satisfaction that settled in my chest like steady heat. I thanked him, hung up, and leaned back in my chair. Outside, the city lights flickered like static. My inbox pinged, an email from HR, timestamped 4:42 p.m. day 8. "Apologies for the delay. Please find attached your severance terms." I didn't even open it. I just forwarded it to Raphael with one line. "Too late." He replied 5 minutes later. By a mile. That was the moment the balance shifted. They thought I was gone. They thought I was too small to fight back. But they'd forgotten the first rule of systems architecture. What you build always leaves a trace. They could erase my name from projects, but not from the logs. They could write me out of meetings, but not out of the code I built line by line. They hadn't fired a ghost. They'd created one. And this ghost kept receipts. It started with a sound I'd been waiting for, the soft slap of an envelope on my doorstep. Thick paper, heavy ink, no return address. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. Inside, 10 pages of legal thunder dressed in Times New Roman. The header screamed cease and desist, violation of non-compete clause. And right under it, Clay's signature, smug as ever, like he'd just personally delivered justice. The letter accused me of malicious engagement in a competitive enterprise and unauthorized use of proprietary systems. I had to laugh. They couldn't even spell architecture correctly in paragraph 3. I didn't call Raphael right away. I made coffee first, black and slow, because moments like that deserve ceremony. Then I scanned the document, sent it to him, and waited. He called less than an hour later. "Well," he said, "they finally bit the hook." "What now?" "Now," he said, "we remind them how calendars work." The next morning, he CC'd me on his reply. It was brutal in its calm. "Dear Counsel," it began, "thank you for your letter dated insert desperation timestamp here. Our client, Ms. Rains, completed all personal projects prior to the termination of her employment, using personal equipment on personal time. As your client failed to meet the legal requirements for severance delivery under State Statute 214.9b, their non-compete clause is now null and void. Kindly advise your client to review their own documentation and calendar." It ended with, "Warm regards, R.V. Alvarado." I read it 3 times, smiling so wide my face hurt. The line about the calendar, pure art. After that, there was silence. No follow-up, no apology, nothing. Just quiet. The kind that tastes like victory. Meanwhile, I kept working on my own terms. The side project I'd helped shape months ago, Project Fennel, was starting to come alive. A few former colleagues had reached out late one Saturday night. "You still in?" they asked. "We need your brain for the core architecture." I didn't hesitate. I said yes, but I was careful. Everything on my own laptop, my own accounts, my own code. No links to the old company. No shared servers. I built like a woman finally breathing air after years underwater. The structure I designed wasn't just code. It was liberation written in syntax. Fennel wasn't a revenge project. It was proof. Proof that my ideas had value beyond Syntrix's walls. That I didn't need a badge or a boss to build something brilliant. 2 months later, the team got funding, real funding. Enough to hire, enough to launch. My name was listed as an architectural consultant. Not flashy, but visible. And that visibility was gasoline. 3 days after the site went live, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't thick. It was angry. Another cease and desist, this time with more drama. Claims of intellectual property theft, breach of contract, interference with investor relations. The whole kitchen sink. I didn't flinch. I didn't even finish reading. I poured myself a glass of wine that tasted like oranges and defiance, scanned the pages, and sent them to Raphael. The next morning, his email arrived like thunder in lowercase letters. Subject: cease and desist. Body: relax. They just realized they shot themselves in the foot. Again. The official response he sent them was surgical. Every line a quiet dagger. Every paragraph ending with legal precision. He reminded them again that my severance was 8 days late, that their own records confirmed it, and that the non-compete they were clinging to had already dissolved like sugar in hot water. I pictured Clay reading it, red-faced in some conference room, realizing too late that his empire was built on a typo and a delay. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was gone. The anger too. What was left was control, calm, deliberate, undeniable. They thought they could scare me into silence. But the only thing their threats did was make my story legally sound. They weren't fighting me anymore. They were fighting the clock. When the court date finally arrived, the air itself felt manufactured. Too cold, too filtered, like they'd vacuum-sealed the truth out of the room. The conference table gleamed under white lights. A pitcher of untouched water sat in the middle, like some offering to corporate gods who'd already stopped listening. Syntrix's legal team filed in first. Perfect hair, polished shoes, briefcases like armor. Clay came in last, no tie, his fake confidence stretched thin under the fluorescent glare. He didn't look at me, not right away. Maybe he thought ignoring me would make me smaller. It didn't. Raphael sat beside me, calm as ever. He wasn't the kind of lawyer who barked or grandstand. He was the kind that waited for the other side to trip on their own script. Opposing counsel started reading their prepared story, their version of reality. Polished, rehearsed, full of words like misconduct and breach. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even frown. I just watched the words roll off their tongues like lies trying to find somewhere to land. When they were done, Raphael slid a slim folder across the table. Per request, he said evenly. All documentation related to the severance timeline. Pages 13 through 22 might be of interest. They flipped through it quickly, at first confident, then slower, and slower still. Page 18. That was the one that cracked everything open. It was an internal HR Slack message. Casual, routine, damning. Just a heads up, it read. Nancy's severance paperwork didn't get filed until today. Clay didn't sign off until this morning. That puts us 9 days out. We good. 9 days. The junior lawyer's pen stopped mid-note. The lead counsel squinted at the timestamp. 9, he repeated under his breath. Raphael didn't even smile. He just leaned back slightly, folding his hands. Across the table, Clay shifted in his seat, clearing his throat like he could cough away a digital record. That's clearly a clerical delay, he started, voice thin. We had verbal notice. Verbal notice doesn't start a legal countdown, Raphael said calmly. Written confirmation does. Your own internal memo proves when that happened. Day 9. Silence. Thick and heavy, the kind that makes you hear the hum of the air vents. The other lawyer tried to recover, flipping pages too fast. Even so, this seems technical, Raphael said quietly. Law usually is. A few people actually looked down at the table after that. Clay didn't. He just stared at his glass of water, hands clasped too tightly, the tremor in his fingers betraying everything he wouldn't say. I sat perfectly still, not gloating, not smiling, just breathing. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth finally sitting on the record. Then the lead attorney asked the question that would end it all. His tone had changed, less performance, more damage control. Mr. Moley, he said, for the record, when exactly did you inform Ms. Raines of her termination? Clay opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He blinked. Well, technically, it was during that check-in meeting. Do you have documentation? Not immediately, no. But there were follow-ups. The HR representative finally spoke, soft but clear. The paperwork was submitted the following Friday, she said. That's when it was officially recorded. Raphael didn't even move. Day 9, he murmured again like a verdict. The lead counsel shut his folder slowly. We'll take a brief recess, he said, voice flat. It wasn't a request, it was surrender. They left the room, Clay trailing behind like a man who just realized his own reflection was lying to him. I sat back, letting out the breath I'd been holding for months. Raphael turned to me, eyes calm. You did everything right, he said. I know, I whispered. And for the first time, I truly believed it. When they came back 20 minutes later, their energy had changed. No more arrogance, no more tight smiles. Just silence and paperwork. The case that had started with a roar ended with a whisper. By the next morning, the lawsuit was gone, withdrawn quietly, buried under polite legal language that basically meant, we give up. Raphael forwarded me the final notice at dawn. The subject line read, and that's breakfast. I opened it, smiled, and for once, didn't feel the need to reply. Because the victory wasn't in the words, it was in the fact that they had finally run out of airs. When the court date finally arrived, the air itself felt manufactured, too cold, too filtered, like they'd vacuum-sealed the truth out of the room. The conference table gleamed under white lights. A pitcher of untouched water sat in the middle, like some offering to corporate gods who'd already stopped listening. Syntrix's legal team filed in first. Perfect hair, polished shoes, briefcases like armor. Clay came in last, no tie, his fake confidence stretched thin under the fluorescent glare. He didn't look at me, not right away. Maybe he thought ignoring me would make me smaller. It didn't. Raphael sat beside me, calm as ever. He wasn't the kind of lawyer who barked or grandstand. He was the kind that waited for the other side to trip on their own script. Opposing counsel started reading their prepared story, their version of reality. Polished, rehearsed, full of words like misconduct and breach. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even frown. I just watched the words roll off their tongues like lies trying to find somewhere to land. When they were done, Raphael slid a slim folder across the table. Per request, he said evenly, all documentation related to the severance timeline. Pages 13 through 22 might be of interest. They flipped through it quickly at first, confident. Then slower. And slower still. Page 18. That was the one that cracked everything open. It was an internal HR Slack message. Casual, routine, damning. Just a heads up, it read. Nancy's severance paperwork didn't get filed until today. Clay didn't sign off until this morning. That puts us 9 days out. We good. 9 days. The junior lawyer's pen stopped mid-note. The lead counsel squinted at the timestamp. 9, he repeated under his breath. Raphael didn't even smile. He just leaned back slightly, folding his hands. Across the table, Clay shifted in his seat, clearing his throat like he could cough away a digital record. That's clearly a clerical delay, he started, voice thin. We had verbal notice. Verbal notice doesn't start a legal countdown, Raphael said calmly. Written confirmation does. Your own internal memo proves when that happened. Day 9. Silence. Thick and heavy, the kind that makes you hear the hum of the air vents. The other lawyer tried to recover, flipping pages too fast. Even so, this seems technical, Raphael said quietly. Law usually is. A few people actually looked down at the table after that. Clay didn't. He just stared at his glass of water, hands clasped too tightly, the tremor in his fingers betraying everything he wouldn't say. I sat perfectly still, not gloating, not smiling, just breathing. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth finally sitting on the record. Then the lead attorney asked the question that would end it all. His tone had changed, less performance, more damage control. Mr. Moley, he said, for the record, when exactly did you inform Ms. Raines of her termination? Clay opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He blinked. Well, technically, it was during that check-in meeting. Do you have documentation? Not immediately, no, but there were follow-ups. The HR representative finally spoke, soft but clear. The paperwork was submitted the following Friday, she said. That's when it was officially recorded. Raphael didn't even move. Day 9, he murmured again, like a verdict. The lead counsel shut his folder slowly. We'll take a brief recess, he said, voice flat. It wasn't a request, it was surrender. They left the room, Clay trailing behind like a man who just realized his own reflection was lying to him. I sat back, letting out the breath I'd been holding for months. Raphael turned to me, eyes calm. You did everything right, he said. I know, I whispered. And for the first time, I truly believed it. When they came back 20 minutes later, their energy had changed. No more arrogance, no more tight smiles. Just silence and paperwork. The case that had started with a roar ended with a whisper. By the next morning, the lawsuit was gone, withdrawn quietly, buried under polite legal language that basically meant, we give up. Raphael forwarded me the final notice at dawn. The subject line read, and that's breakfast. I opened it, smiled, and for once, didn't feel the need to reply. Because the victory wasn't in the words, it was in the fact that they had finally run out of theirs. Launch day didn't feel like launch day. There were no balloons, no countdowns, no speeches, just keyboards clacking, half-eaten snacks, and the hum of nervous breathing. Screens flickered with lines of code, Slack channels pinged like heartbeats, and someone cursed because the favicon wouldn't load on Safari. That was how real beginnings looked. Messy. Focused. Alive. When Project Fennel finally went live, it wasn't some miracle. It was the product of sleepless nights, coffee-stained keyboards, and a small team that believed in building something that worked, not something that sounded good in a pitch meeting. The platform ran smoother than anything I'd ever built at Syntrix. No bugs. No fake deadlines. No PowerPoint pretending to be progress. Just clean, functional architecture. And at the heart of it, my design. The one Clay once dismissed as invisible improvement. He told me, you can't sell something people can't see. He was wrong. You could feel the system. The code had my fingerprints all over it, the modular flow, the latency handling, the pipeline efficiency. It was mine. Not stolen, not buried under someone else's name. Mine in plain sight. When the site went live, my name appeared on the About page. Co-founder, architectural lead, Nancy Raines. No one could erase that now. Emails started pouring in, congratulations, interviews, invitations to panels. I ignored most of them. I wasn't chasing applause. I just wanted to work, to build, to finally feel like every key I pressed mattered again. Then Raphael texted me a link one morning. "You like this one?" he wrote. It was a post from Clay. Or Clane, as he now called himself. Apparently dropping a letter was his idea of rebirth. The headline read, "I made mistakes, reflections on leadership, ego, and change." 3 paragraphs of vague regret. Something about the cost of ambition, another about learning to recognize talent before it's too late. No names, no accountability. Just enough smoke to pretend there'd been fire. The comments were brutal. Some called him brave. Most called him what he was, a man trying to rewrite his own downfall. My favorite comment said, "You didn't learn. You just got caught." I didn't reply. I didn't even finish reading. I closed the tab and went back to work. Later that afternoon, I sat down for a small podcast interview. Nothing huge, just a tech host who liked founder stories. She asked the usual things. What inspired Fennel, how it started, what it was like going from burnout to freedom. Then she leaned in and asked softly, "Do you ever regret leaving Syntrix?" I smiled. "I didn't leave," I said. "I was released." She laughed, but I wasn't joking. "Legally," I added. That made all the difference. When the interview ended, I turned off the mic and just sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet. Not the kind that follows chaos, but the kind that means peace. Outside my new office window, sunlight spilled across rows of desks. The team was laughing about some bug fix that broke and fixed itself again. I watched them, the energy, the honesty, the messiness of real creation. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving someone else's system. I was building my own. Sometimes I still think about that office. Those late nights, the hum of old servers, the taste of stale coffee and silence. It feels like a different lifetime now. Back then, I thought power came from titles and approval, from being seen. But the truth is, the most dangerous person in any room is the one who's underestimated. That's who I became. When people try to erase you, they don't realize they're just giving you the clean space to rewrite yourself. All that time they thought I was waiting to be chosen, I was really documenting, learning, preparing. Every slight, every oversight, every stolen idea, it all became part of the architecture that built my freedom. The world loves to talk about innovation, but nobody talks about the ones who hold it together quietly. The invisible hands that make everything work until someone else takes credit. I was one of those hands. Now, I build things where people like that never have to be invisible again. Sometimes justice doesn't come with noise or applause. It comes with calm, with patience, with your name showing up exactly where it always should have been. That's what Fennel became for me. Not revenge, not proof, just peace built out of precision. I still keep that old ARC folder. It sits in a drive I rarely open now, tucked between project backups and personal files. Not because I need it, but because it reminds me where this all started. One night, one folder, one decision to stop waiting for fairness and start creating my own. If you've ever sat in a cubicle staring at a screen, wondering if anyone even notices how hard you're holding everything together, this story is for you. You don't need their permission to be valuable. You just need your own receipts. So document everything. Protect your work. And when they think they've buried you, remember, roots grow underground. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously. You're part of the few who listen all the way through, who get why these stories matter. Hit the like button, drop a comment, and subscribe because maybe one day, one of these stories will remind you you're not powerless either. Until next time, keep your folders backed up, your contracts read, and your coffee strong. Because the best revenge is being the one who built the system they thought would break you.